Commander Velthor sat across from the young war correspondent in the sterile chamber of the Galactic Veterans Memorial. His 4 arms, 2 of them cybernetic replacements, rested heavily on the metal table. The chrome fingers of his artificial limbs tapped nervously against the surface, creating a rhythmic clicking that echoed through the quiet room. The Cathari veteran's scarred carapace bore the marks of countless battles across 3 star systems, plasma burns that had never quite healed right, deep gouges from Zephyrian claws, and the telltale scorch marks of human pulse rifles. The memorial chamber itself was a testament to galactic warfare. Holographic displays showed the faces of fallen soldiers from dozens of species, their stories. Preserved in crystalline data cores, the walls were lined with weapons from every major conflict of the last century: energy swords, quantum cannons, and strangely a collection of primitive human firearms that seemed almost quaint among the advanced alien technology. "You want to know about the war?" Velthar's voice was like grinding stone, each word carefully measured. The translator chip in his throat crackled slightly, still not quite calibrated after all these years. "Everyone asks about our victories, our strategies, our advanced weapons. They want to hear about the glorious battles, the tactical brilliance, the superior technology that made us the dominant force in 3 sectors." He shifted in his chair, the metal groaning under his weight. At nearly 8 feet tall and built like a living tank, Velthar had once been the pride of the Cathari assault forces. Now, decades later, he looked tired. His compound eyes, once sharp enough to spot enemy movement from 3 kilometers away, seemed dulled by memories. "Want to know what really haunts an old soldier's dreams?" he continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Not the victories, not the defeats, not even the friends I lost along the way." The correspondent leaned forward, recorder humming softly. She was young, maybe fresh out of the Galactic Communications Academy, with the eager look of someone who had never seen real combat. Her species, the Villani, were known for their journalistic skills and natural curiosity. They had joined the galactic community through diplomacy rather than conquest, something Velthar sometimes envied. "It's the humans," Velthar said, and something in his tone made the room feel colder. "The day we encountered the human forces on Kepler 4-4 to be, everything changed. We thought they were primitives, new to the galaxy, crude technology, simple tactics. Their ships were barely faster than light. Their weapons were chemical-based projectiles mixed with basic energy systems. On paper, they shouldn't have lasted 5 minutes against our fleet." He paused, his compound eyes reflecting the dim lighting of the memorial chamber. Outside, through the transparent aluminum windows, the lights of New Centauri glittered like stars. It was a peaceful sight, but Velthor wasn't seeing the present. He was somewhere else, somewhere darker. "Wrongly," where he continued, his voice gaining strength. "Their commander was someone called Hyen Wu." It's another name in our intelligence files. "Human male, age 37, former military academy graduate from their home system. Standard biographical data. We had no idea we were facing something that would redefine warfare itself." The correspondent's recorder captured every word. But she found herself leaning forward, drawn in by the veteran's intensity. There was something in his voice, a mixture of respect and terror that she had never heard before. "The briefing before our first engagement was routine," Velthor said, his cybernetic fingers still tapping against the table. "Admiral Korthax stood before us in the war room, pointing at holographic displays of human ships. Primitive vessels, he called them. Crude fusion drives, basic shielding, projectile weapons that belonged in a museum." We laughed. Actually laughed. He shook his head, a gesture he had picked up from humans during his years as a prisoner of war. The humans had been in space for less than 200 years. We had been conquering star systems for over 3,000. It should have been like watching children play with toys. But there was something in their transmissions, he continued, his voice growing quieter. Something our intelligence officers missed. When we demanded their surrender, this Hyen Wu came on screen. He was smaller than any of us, maybe 6 feet tall, with dark hair and determined eyes. He looked at our massive fleet, our superior numbers, our advanced weapons, and he smiled. The correspondent felt a chill run down her spine. What did he say? He said, "We know you're stronger, we know you're faster, we know you have better weapons, but you made one mistake." And when Admiral Korthax asked what that was, Hyanwa's smile got wider. "You came to our neighborhood." Velthar's compound eyes seemed to focus on something far away. That's when I realized we weren't just fighting another species. We were fighting an entire race that had spent their entire existence preparing. For this moment, without even knowing it, the battle began at dawn on their world, Velthor continued, his voice growing distant. The correspondent noticed his cybernetic fingers had stopped tapping and were now gripping the edge of the table. Our fleet descended, expecting quick surrender. 12 dreadnoughts, 47 assault cruisers, and over 300 fighter craft. The humans had maybe 30 ships defending the entire planet. By every military calculation in the galaxy, it should have been over in minutes. He gestured with his cybernetic arm. Servos worry softly. But as our drop pods pierced their atmosphere, something felt wrong. There was no panic in their communications. No desperate pleas for mercy. Just calm, methodical coordination. Their pilots were flying straight at our fighters, not trying to escape or outmaneuver. They were ramming our ships. Velthor's compound eyes dilated as he remembered. I was in the first wave, leading my assault team toward their main defensive position. The human base was built into a mountain, nothing fancy, just reinforced concrete and metal. We had plasma cannons that could melt through their strongest materials. But when we got close, that's when I saw her. The correspondent held her breath, sensing the weight of what was coming. I watched through my scope as their soldier, a female they called Yunjid, dragged her wounded commander to safety. She couldn't have been more than 25 in human years, small, even by their standards. She had taken plasma burns across half her body, the kind of wounds that would have killed any of us instantly. But she kept moving. Actually kept moving. Velthor stood up and walked to the window, his mechanical legs making soft hydraulic sounds. What I didn't understand then was that humans don't just fight with their weapons. They fight with their entire being. Yunji had lost her left arm to a plasma burst, but she was still dragging her commander with her remaining hand. Blood was streaming down her face, but her eyes were focused, determined. My squad had her position surrounded. She knew it, we knew it, everyone knew it. Standard protocol would be to call for surrender, offer medical treatment, secure the prisoners. But when our forces closed in, she looked directly at my position through her rifle scope, and she smiled, actually smiled. The correspondent felt her skin crawl. What happened next? She reached into her vest with her remaining hand and pulled out a small device, a detonator. Our sensors immediately detected the explosives buried throughout the area, enough to level half the mountain. But instead of using it as a threat, instead of demanding we back off, she just pressed the button. Velthor's voice cracked slightly. The explosion was massive. It took out 20 of my best soldiers and herself, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the message she left behind, broadcast on all frequencies. For every human that falls, we will take 10 of you with us. He turned back to the correspondent, his scarred face reflecting the pain of the memory. In that moment, I realized we weren't fighting an army. We were fighting an entire species that had decided they would rather die than surrender. Every human on that planet had made the same choice Yanji made. They were all walking bombs, all, ready to take us down with them. The battle continued for hours, but it wasn't like any warfare I had ever experienced. Humans would fake surrender, then activate grenades when our soldiers got close. They would hide in collapsed buildings, waiting for rescue teams, then strike when we were trying to help our wounded. One human pilot, call sign Ghost Leader, kept his damaged fighter in the air for 3 hours, using it as a flying bomb against our capital ships. Velthar's mandibles clicked nervously. But the psychological warfare was what really got to us. Every human radio transmission was calm, almost cheerful. We're talking about their families, their homes, their plans for dinner. We're dying. They were making jokes. One human soldier, bleeding out from multiple wounds, spent his last minutes telling his squad about his daughter's birthday party. That's when their leader, Hyanwu, appeared on our screens after that. No threats, no bargaining, No desperate last words, just a simple statement. We are ready to die. Hear you? He was standing in the ruins of their command center, surrounded by the bodies of his people, and he looked as calm as if he was discussing the weather. The correspondent realized she was holding her breath. What did your commander say? Admiral Korthax tried to negotiate, offered them safe passage off the planet, prisoner rights, even territorial concessions. But Hyanwu just shook his head. Came to our home, he said. You started this. Now you get to see what humans do when someone threatens their family. Velthor sat back down heavily. That's when I knew we were facing something beyond our understanding. We had fought dozens of species across the galaxy. Some were stronger. Some were faster. Some had better technology. But humans were different. They'd weaponized their love for each other. Every human on that planet was ready to die, not for glory or honor, but for the simple reason that their death might save another human somewhere else. The battle lasted 17 more hours. By the end, we had lost over 60% of our forces and the humans. They lost everyone. Every single defender died fighting. But in their final transmission, Hyanwu was still smiling. Tell your people, he said, that this is what happens when you attack a human world. Now imagine what happens when you attack Earth. The siege lasted 6 months. Velthor's voice cracked, and the correspondent noticed his cybernetic hand was trembling slightly. Titan's Gate was supposed to be a simple supply station. A mining outpost on the edge of human space, intelligence said. Maybe 200 humans, minimal defenses, strategic value only. We had them surrounded, cut off from supplies, outnumbered 50 to 1. Any rational species would have surrendered after the first week. He stood and paced, his mechanical legs whirring softly as they adjusted to his weight. The sound echoed in the memorial chamber like a metronome counting down to disaster. But humans aren't rational. Something else entirely. Something we had never encountered in 3,000 years of galactic conquest. Velthor stopped at the window, staring out at the peaceful cityscape. The station was built into an asteroid, honeycombed with tunnels and chambers, perfect for mining, terrible for defense. Our siege engines could have cracked it open like an egg, should have been over in days. But their engineer, a young man named Jae-Sung, had other ideas. Correspondent leaned forward, captivated. What did he do? Turned the entire asteroid into a weapon, Velthor said, his voice filled with a mixture of admiration and horror. Jae-Sung had jury-rigged their defenses using scrap metal and determination. But it wasn't just the materials he used. It was how he thought. He would identify a weakness, plan our attack, move in for the kill, and find that the weakness had become a trap. Velthor-esque compound eyes focused on the memory. Every day, our bombardments would crater their walls. Massive plasma cannons that could melt through battlecruiser armor. We'd watch the explosions, see the chunks of rock and metal flying through space, and think we were making progress. But every night, they would rebuild them stronger. How is that possible? The correspondent asked. Without supplies? Without proper materials? That's what we couldn't understand, Velthor replied, beginning to pace again. Jae-Sung was using the wreckage of our own attacks. Every missile we fired, every plasma bolt that hit their walls, he was salvaging the materials. He turned our weapons into their shields, but it was more than that. It was using the asteroid itself. Mining equipment became defensive turrets, or processing plants became ammunition factories. The veteran's voice grew quieter. I watched through our surveillance. Drones as he worked. 20-hour days, sometimes more. His hands were bleeding from handling sharp metal. His face was covered in burns from welding equipment, but he never stopped, and neither did the others. They all worked like their lives depended on it. 'Cause they did, the correspondent said softly. No. Velthor shook his head. That's what we thought at first, but it wasn't about their own lives. It was about something bigger. I started monitoring their communications, trying to understand their strategy. What I found was worse than any military intelligence. He paused, his cybernetic fingers clenching into fists. They were sending messages home, not military reports. Not strategic updates, personal messages. Jae-Sung was sending videos to his sister on Earth, showing her his engineering work. Look what I built today, he would say, pointing at defensive barriers made from scrap metal. Remember when we used to build those model ships? Same principle, just bigger. The correspondent felt a chill run down her spine. They were treating it like a game, no, Velthor said firmly. They were treating it like family. Every human on that station was fighting for every other human in the galaxy. They weren't just defending a supply depot. They were defending the idea that humans had a right to exist in space. He walked back to the table and sat down heavily. I remember the day their medic So Young was captured during a supply run. She had been trying to reach a crashed shuttle, looking for medical supplies for their wounded. My squad surrounded her in the asteroid field. She was alone, outnumbered, no chance of escape. We expected intelligence, leverage. Maybe she would tell us about their defenses, their plans, their weaknesses. Instead, when she saw our wounded prisoners in the detention area, she insisted on treating them. Even with her hands bound, she directed our own medics on human anatomy to save lives. Velthar's mandibles clicked nervously. Our medics didn't know how to treat humans. Different biology, different responses to trauma. But Sa Young spent hours teaching them, showed them how human blood clotted differently, how their bones healed, how their nervous systems responded to pain. She saved the lives of soldiers who had been trying to kill her people. Why would she do that? The correspondent asked, though she was beginning to understand. Because that's what humans do, Velthar said, his voice filled with wonder. Interrogation specialist, a Kethri named Vorthak, asked her the same question. Soyan looked at him with those calm human eyes and said, because they're hurt, and I'm a doctor. That's reason enough. Velthor stopped pacing, his eyes fixed on a distant point. That's when I realized we weren't fighting soldiers. We were fighting an entire species that had weaponized their compassion. They cared so much about each other that they became unstoppable. Not because they were stronger or faster or smarter, but because they refused to let anyone suffer alone. The siege continued for months after that, but something had changed. My soldiers started asking questions. If humans could show mercy to their enemies, what did that make us? If a human medic could risk her life to save Cathari prisoners, what were we really fighting for? The correspondent realized she was holding her breath. How did it end? It didn't end, Velthora said quietly. Just stopped. One day, Admiral Korthax received new orders. War was over. Humans had agreed to peace talks. But Titan's Gate was still holding out, still fighting. So Young was still treating our wounded, and Jae-soon was still building impossible defenses. From nothing, we had to tell them the war was over. And when we did, they invited us inside for dinner. The end came when their supplies finally ran out, Velthor continued, his voice barely above a whisper. The correspondent noticed that his cybernetic hand had stopped trembling and was now perfectly still, as if the memory had frozen him in place. After 6 months of siege, even human determination couldn't create food from nothing. We intercepted their communications. The conversations were getting shorter, more desperate, never defeated. He leaned back in his chair, the metal creaking under his weight. Haiyan Wu gathered his remaining forces in what used to be their main hangar bay. Maybe 300 humans against our 10,000. I watched the footage from our surveillance drones. He stood on a makeshift platform, surrounded by faces that looked tired but not broken. These people had been eating half rations for months, sleeping in shifts, working 20-hour days. But they still looked at their commander with trust. Velthor's compound eyes focused on the memory. What he said next changed everything I thought I knew about warfare. He gave them a choice: surrender and live as prisoners, or make their deaths count. No speeches about glory or honor. It's just a simple question. Do you want to live on your knees or die standing up? The correspondent felt her breath catch. Did they choose? Every single human chose to fight. Not because they were forced, but because they believed their sacrifice would save human colonies elsewhere. I watched a maintenance worker, a woman named Haijin, step forward first. She was maybe 60 years old, had never held a weapon in her life. She looked at Haiyan Wu and said, "My grandson is on New Soul. If my death means he gets to grow up free, then I'll take as many of these aliens with me as I can." Velthar stood up and walked to the memorial wall, where holographic faces of fallen soldiers flickered in eternal tribute. One by one, they all stepped forward. Scientists, engineers, medics, even children barely old enough to hold a rifle, each one making the same choice. Each one ready to die for people they would never meet. But it wasn't just about dying, he continued, his voice growing stronger. It was about how they planned to die. These humans turned their final battle into a masterpiece of tactical brilliance. They had studied our formations, our weaknesses, our psychology. They knew exactly how to hurt us the most. The correspondent leaned forward, captivated despite the horror of the story. How did the battle begin? Music, Velthar said, and for the first time since the interview began, he almost smiled. They broadcasted on all frequencies. Human song called Ararong. Beautiful, haunting melody that every human seemed to know. They were singing as they took their positions, singing as they prepared to die. Velthar's expression grew dark again. The battle lasted 18 hours. 18 hours of the most intense fighting I have ever experienced. These humans had turned their dying station into a killing machine. Every corridor was a trap. Every room was a fortress. Every human was a weapon. I remember a sniper named Tahian. He positioned himself in a maintenance shaft overlooking the main corridor to their reactor. For 6 hours, he held that position alone, giving his people time to evacuate civilians to the deeper tunnels. 6 hours of constant fighting, picking off our soldiers one by one. Velthar's cybernetic fingers began tapping against the memorial wall. We threw everything at him. Plasma grenades, pulse rifles, even a portable cannon. The corridor was filled with smoke and fire, but he kept shooting. When we finally reached him, he was nearly dead from blood loss, but still firing. His rifle was so hot it was melting his hands, but he wouldn't stop. What did he say? Correspondent asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. He asked about his sister. She was a pilot, fighting in another sector. Even as he was dying, he wanted to know if she was safe. Then he triggered the explosives he had rigged around his position, took out 12 of my soldiers and himself. But he was smiling when he did it. Velthar turned back to the correspondent, his compound eyes glistening with something that might have been tears. And their pilot, Masoon, crashed her damaged fighter into our command ship rather than eject. To safety. Her fighter had been hit by plasma fire, engines failing, life support offline. Any rational pilot would have ejected and hoped for rescue, but Misoon saw an opportunity. She lined up her dying fighter with our command ship, the one coordinating the entire assault. Our gunners were trying to shoot her down, but she was flying like nothing I'd ever seen, rolling, diving, using the asteroid's gravity to slingshot around our defensive fire. She took out our entire tactical center in one kamikaze run. Correspondent was holding her breath. What was her final transmission? She was laughing as she died. Not crazy laughter, not desperate laughter, happy laughter. Like she had just won the greatest game ever played. Her last words were, "Tell Earth we held the line. Tell them we made it count." Velthar sat back down, his massive frame seeming to collapse into the chair. That's when I understood. Humans don't just fight wars. They make themselves into weapons powered by love for their species. Death wasn't just a casualty. It was a deliberate act of love for every other human in the galaxy. We won that battle, but we lost something more important. We lost the certainty that we were the superior species.
Yes.
Because no matter how advanced our technology, no matter how strong our bodies, we had never learned to love each other the way humans do. The interview chamber fell silent, except for the hum of life support systems. Even the holographic memorial displays seemed to dim, as if the station itself was listening to Velthar's words. The correspondent realized she had been holding her breath for what felt like hours. Her recording device capturing every word of this incredible testimony. Velthar returned to his seat, his massive frame seeming smaller somehow. The proud warrior who had entered the room had been replaced by something else, a being carrying the weight of memories too heavy for even his cybernetic enhancements to bear. His forearms hung at his sides like broken weapons, and his compound eyes reflected the soft glow of the memorial lights. "We won that battle," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the station's ambient sounds. Captured the station, secured the system, added another victory to our military records. The Galactic Command celebrated. Promotions were handed out, new territories were claimed, but we lost the war that day. Not militarily, psychologically. My soldiers started having nightmares, not about dying, but about becoming like the humans we fought. The correspondent watched as Velthor's cybernetic hand began to shake again.
What kind of nightmares?
Dreams where they were human? Velthor said, his mandibles clicking softly. Where they had families waiting for them. Children who would never see them again. Loved ones who would mourn their deaths. My toughest warriors. Soldiers who had conquered dozens of worlds were waking up screaming because they dreamed they cared about something more than victory. He looked directly at the correspondent. She saw something in his eyes that she had never seen in any alien before. Genuine human emotion. You ask what haunts me. It's not the violence. It's the humanity they showed in the midst of it. Jason jury-rigging medical equipment for our wounded while his own people were dying. So Young singing lullabies to dying soldiers, ours and theirs in languages she didn't even speak. Haiyan Wu, requesting that we spare his people's bodies for proper burial, even though he knew he would never see it. The correspondent felt tears forming in her eyes. How did your people react to these stories? They didn't believe them at first, Velthor admitted. Command thought it was propaganda, some kind of psychological warfare. But the evidence was everywhere. Video recordings, audio transmissions, physical evidence. A human medic who had used her own blood to save a Kethari soldier. A human engineer who had left detailed instructions for maintaining life support systems, written in 17 different alien languages. Velthor stood up slowly, his prosthetics clicking against the floor like a mournful dirge. The worst part was when we found their personal belongings. Letters to families they would never see again. Photos of children who would grow up without parents. A pilot's journal filled with drawings of birds from a planet she would never visit again. 40 years later, I still wake up seeing Misan's face as she smiled into oblivion. Still hear Tehan asking about his sister's safety, even as he bled. Out. They fought like demons, but they died like saints. They turned warfare into an act of love, and we didn't know how to fight against that. The correspondent realized she was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she listened to this. Alien warrior described the most human thing she had ever heard. What happened to you after the war? I requested a transfer to the diplomatic corps, Velthor said, walking toward the memorial wall. Started studying human culture, human history, human philosophy. I wanted to understand how a species could be so powerful and so gentle at the same time. What I found was even more terrifying than their warfare. He paused at the wall, looking at the faces of fallen soldiers from dozens of species. Humans have been preparing for galactic war their entire existence without even knowing it. Every story they tell their children, every song they sing, every movie they make, it's all about ordinary people doing extraordinary things for love. They've spent thousands of years teaching each other to be heroes. I've spent my retirement advocating for peace, because I know what humans become when they believe their survival is at stake. Not monsters, something far more terrifying. Heroes who will gladly march into hell if it means their children might live in heaven. The correspondent wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Do you think the peace will last? Back to her, his compound eyes reflecting the memorial lights like stars. It has to. Because I've seen what happens when humans fight for something they believe in. I've seen them turn love into a weapon more powerful than any technology we possess, and I've seen them use that weapon without hesitation. He paused at the door, looking back one final time. You want to know why we agreed to the peace accords? Because somewhere in human space, there are more soldiers like Haiyan Wu, more pilots like Misun, more medics like So Young, and the universe isn't ready for what they're capable of when they truly believe. They're fighting for something greater than themselves. The door began to slide open, but Velthor stopped and turned back once more. Tell your people something? For me? Tell them that somewhere in the galaxy, there's an old alien soldier who learned the most important lesson of his life from humans. Love isn't weakness. It's the most powerful force in the universe, and humans have mastered it. The door sealed behind him, leaving only the soft hum of the recorder and the weight of memory. The correspondent sat in the silence for a long time, watching the memorial displays flicker with the faces of the fallen. She thought about Haiyan Wu, and Masoon, about Tahayan and Soyoung, about all the humans who had turned their final moments into acts of love, and she understood. Finally, why the galaxy had chosen peace. The end.